and welcome to our webinar presentation today, The Future of Nursing Around the World. My name is Ron Hoppe. I am the president of Worldwide HealthStaff Solutions, and I'd like to begin by thanking each and every one of you for your interest and for taking the time to join us today. Many more are in the process of logging on, so we'll give them just a moment to do that. And I see that some of you have already started in our chat section of your screen, just to let us know that you're here and to let us know where you're attending from. And if you haven't done that, we always do appreciate if all of our attendees would take just a moment and just say hello in the chat section of your screen. Let us know where you're joining us from today. It's always encouraging to us when we see individuals joining us from many different countries in many different parts of the world. So if you'd be so good and just take a moment and do that, we'd certainly appreciate it. Just a couple of things to review before we get started with our presentation today. The first is everyone that has registered for this presentation today is going to receive a recorded copy of our presentation by email, probably 24 hours from now. So around this time tomorrow, if you've registered for this event, you're going to be receiving an email with a recording of this presentation for your further review. Also, feel free to share that link with any of your friends or colleagues that you think may benefit from this information, but who were not able to register or join us today. So that's one thing. The second thing is we will have time, and I look forward to taking your questions and engaging in interactive dialogue with you. Please utilize, again, the chat section of your screen to send us your questions or your comments. And towards the end of our presentation, we'll certainly make an effort to respond to as many of those questions as we can. Lastly, before we begin, you'll note in the chat section at the very top, there's a yellow box there with some information. We call it our Post-it note. And two things here. We have live members of our recruiting team standing by. That didn't sound right. They are all alive, yes. We have members of our recruiting team standing by that you can contact and connect with live and in real time using the link here in the Post-it note. And again, please feel free to share your questions and comments as we go along today. I see we are continuing to have additional people join us from many, many different countries. And again, very much appreciative of everyone who's taken the time, regardless of where in the world you are joining us from. I want to start this morning on the topic of the future of nursing around the world. Nursing is changing quickly in all countries, regardless of where you may be joining us from. Nursing is changing either because the standards are perhaps being raised in the country where you're currently living and working. Perhaps you're in a jurisdiction in a country where there's a nursing shortage, and perhaps that nursing shortage is getting worse, which is the case in many of the Western countries. Regardless of where you may be working and practicing as a nurse, change is a constant, and nowhere is that more obvious than when it comes to nursing around the world. And we're going to explore today what some of these changes are, what some of these changes will be in the future, and what do they mean for you as a practicing nurse or as someone who's looking to pursue nursing as a career. And just as we begin to contemplate some of these questions, I want to take just a moment and ground us in our conversation today. You know, when we talk about the profession of nursing these days, the tendency is to have conversations that are focused on statistics, conversations that are focused on trends and data, quantitative, facts and figures. And while these are important, I think the most important thing to remember is that nursing is not a job. It is at its core, it's a calling. It's a person-to-person interaction. Florence Nightingale spoke to this reality very eloquently when she said, nursing is an art. And if it is to be made an art, it requires an exclusive devotion, as hard a preparation as any painter's or sculptor's work. For what is the having to do with dead canvas or dead marble compared with having to do with the living body, the temple of God's Spirit? It is one of the fine arts. I had almost said the finest of fine arts. And I think as we deal with what lies ahead for nursing, that this is something that we should never forget, that nursing is not a job, it's a calling. And I trust that each of you that have joined us today for this presentation who are registered nurses feel that you have this sense of calling in pursuing nursing, not as an occupation, but as a vocation for your lifetime. Nurses are in demand around the globe. I don't think this is news to anyone. There's many studies that have been completed very recently, in fact, World Health Organization and others, that speak very clearly to the very significant and growing demand for nurses around the world, and the shortage in many places, both in developing countries as well as developed countries. So nurses are in demand around the globe. Howard Caton, who is executive member of the International Council of Nurses, stated very recently that the worldwide shortage of nurses needs to be considered as a global health emergency, and recovery from the current situation must be made a priority for governments everywhere. And I think that statement is true pretty well in any country where you may be joining us from. This statement could be made, and it would be true in the context of nursing and nursing workforce in your country. Nurse migration in 2023 continues to grow, and this is simply the continuation of a trend and a reality that's been taking place for the last 50 plus years, where nurses from certain parts of the world are looking to pursue and are pursuing opportunities in other countries. Historically and today, we see that generally, not exclusively, but generally, the trend is for nurses in developing countries to seek opportunities in more developed or developed countries. This is simply a recognition of the reality that individuals in developing countries are looking for opportunities to improve their life and the life of their families, for themselves, from a professional perspective, from a professional practice point of view, as well as economically and socially. And when we speak to nurses from all over the globe, many times their motivation for considering relocation is to provide a better future for their children and future generations. Nurse migration in 2023, some of the historical trends I think have started to change a little bit, and we'll talk about that in some more detail. As more countries have become open to welcoming nurses from around the world, nurses are now evaluating those opportunities based on the accessibility of various countries that they are considering relocating to. And as I said, we'll explore this whole concept in some further detail here as we go through our presentation. And ultimately, nurse migration and the migration of healthcare workers generally has a developed country as the ultimate destination. So when we talk about developed countries, we're talking about select countries in Europe, obviously USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and in parts of the Gulf region. So while many of the nurse migration patterns in 2023 are consistent with the patterns of the last 30 and 50 years, we are starting to see some shift based on the accessibility of countries to nurses and healthcare professionals that are looking to make a move. Today, probably no surprise to most of you who have joined us here today, the primary sending countries, so these are the countries from which nurses are migrating to other locations. The primary sending countries today are Philippines, India, Nepal, Nigeria, and Ghana. There are certainly other countries that are sending significant numbers of nurses. These are more developed countries in some cases, such as South Korea. But in terms of countries that would be considered to be developing countries, these are the countries listed here that are the primary sending countries, being Philippines, India, Nepal, Nigeria, and Ghana. What's interesting is as the demand for nurses around the globe continues to increase, I think we're going to see other countries become more significant sending countries as the level and standard of education is being raised in countries across West Africa, Mexico, some South American countries. I know from a U.S. perspective, there's a serious discussion about creating and opening more NCLEX test centers in other parts of the world to make that exam more accessible so that more nurses would be able to come to the U.S. Likewise, for other countries, there's discussions underway on issues such as standardized credentialing and licensure. Even on a global scale, there's conversations starting about having a global standard for nurse licensure and nurse credentialing so that once a nurse was able to achieve that certification or that standard, that their mobility and ability to work in other countries around the world would be greatly enhanced as opposed to having to navigate unique and sometimes very different licensure processes between countries. So while these are the primary sending countries today, it is anticipated that additional countries will take steps to ensure that their healthcare workforce is also able to access these opportunities on a global scale. You may be wondering, or you may be asking, or perhaps you've had this experience firsthand, the contribution that's being made, the increasing contribution that's being made by healthcare workers, migrant healthcare workers around the world in terms of remittances back to their home country are very, very significant. And this is a reason why many countries are wanting to ensure that their workers, although they're also needed at home, are prepared to work and succeed on the global stage. I recently had the opportunity myself to meet with the Secretary of Labor and the President of the Philippines to discuss this issue. And President Marcos did comment that it is accepted. It is just the way it is that nurses are leaving. So if nurses are leaving, then what do we need to do as a country in the Philippines to ensure that they are the best representatives of the Philippines and can be as successful as possible wherever they may be working around the world. Today, in 2023, the primary receiving countries, so these are the countries where international or migrant health workers are looking to move to. Again, no surprise, these will be countries that all of you will be familiar with: USA, United Kingdom, Gulf region, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe. Everybody's familiar with opportunities in the USA. Everybody is probably somewhat less familiar with opportunities in some of these other locations. But we're going to dig into this just in some more detail here in just a moment, because as never before, the United States now has real competition within the international nursing community as being the ultimate destination. As additional countries have embraced and welcomed international healthcare providers from the world, around the world, they now find themselves having choices that they've never had before. I should add to this list as well that Canada continues to be a primary receiving country as well. So as you consider, what might be best for you and what might be in your future, I want to share with you just a couple of thoughts I think that are important to consider so that you can make the best informed decision for yourself. So these are very broad, very, very broad categories. I'm going to take just a moment in each one of them and just share with you things that you should consider as you evaluate whether the US or the UK or some other country is the best opportunity for yourself. The first, I think, fundamental question that you have to ask yourself when you're thinking about migrating to another country is the question of, what are my priorities? Why am I wanting to do this? Okay. Now, as you reflect on your priorities, they're going to be different. If we have, asked this question of 10 people, we're going to get 9 or 10 different answers. So, for example, if your priority is to be able to move from your current location to another country where you can perhaps earn more money or your family can be in a better situation, if that is your top priority, then you're going to be focusing on countries where the visa and licensure process can be completed as expeditiously as possible. As you consider your opportunities around the world, there's countries that you might be able to get to in 6 months. And there's other opportunities where it's going to take you 2 years or longer to complete your immigration journey. So I think identifying what your priorities are they short-term priorities? Are they longer-term priorities? Are they based strictly on economics? Or do you have other social or family considerations that you're trying to accomplish? So what are your priorities is an area that you need to consider very, very carefully as opposed to just running after the first opportunity that seems to be most appealing. After you consider what your priorities are, I think there's a certain reality that you also have to consider your resources. Your resources. The process of migrating to different countries involves different steps, different processes, different testing and different examinations. And these may require you to pay for these yourself. In some locations, some of these expenses may be funded by an employer. But what are your resources? So as you identify your priorities and the countries that you may be most interested in, what resources are you going to be required to have in order to be able to pursue that opportunity? Coming to the United States requires the NCLEX exam, which requires a credentials evaluation. It requires an exam fee. It oftentimes requires traveling to an exam location, requires an English language test, etc. It may also include having to pay various immigration fees for your immediate family members, as opposed to other countries where maybe you can't even bring your family with you, but maybe the employer is going to pay for everything. It really requires minimal resources on your part. So many considerations, both in terms of what are your priorities and what are your resources. And then lastly, what is your readiness? It's great to say, I'm ready to move to this country or that country, but do you understand what the requirements are? Have you taken steps to comply with those requirements? Again, do you have the resources to comply with those requirements? So as you consider what the future of nursing looks like for yourself individually, I think these are sort of the big macro issues to consider to help you make the most informed and best decision for your future. I think there's a few other things to consider as well. Every opportunity, and by every opportunity, I could have used the word country. Every country and every opportunity has pros and cons. And maybe for yourself, it's as simple as the old technique of taking a piece of paper, drawing a line down the center, and on the left-hand side, listing all the pros, and on the right-hand side, listing all the cons that you can identify for a particular opportunity. Some of the key questions you want to answer in determining the pros and cons of a particular opportunity, to me, would start with understanding whether a particular country is offering permanent residency or a permanent visa, or is it only, do you only have access to a temporary visa? So again, what are your priorities? Are they short-term? If they're short-term, then maybe going where only a temporary visa is issued works great. If your priorities are more longer-term, then perhaps you want to focus on opportunities where you can most quickly and most easily achieve permanent residency status. I touched on already testing requirements, process, and costs. The testing requirements and related processes are different, quite a bit different for most of the countries that you may be considering. So what are those requirements? How long does it take to comply with them? And what are the costs that you might have to incur in order to satisfactorily meet these requirements? Again, different for each country. So this aspect will be more attractive in some countries, less attractive in other countries. Visa, permanent versus temporary, is also going to vary, as are the timelines that are required to complete the process from start to finish. So again, if your goals are more short-term, what are the countries that you can get to most quickly? If you are taking the longer-term view, then maybe you're okay waiting for a visa that might take 1 or 2 years to process. But again, it's important to understand these considerations and to carefully consider them in the context of your personal goals and your personal priorities. And then to have a realistic assessment, really look closely into the mirror and consider what is your ability to achieve the goals that you've set. It's absolutely fine to have great goals and huge goals, but if you don't have a plan, a workable, tangible plan of how you may be able to achieve those goals, it may be more of a wish than it is a plan. So these are a few things that I would encourage each of you to consider if you're just starting your immigration journey to a particular location, or if you're just considering which journey might be most appropriate for you to go on. I hope that you'll find these points and these thoughts to be helpful for you. I'd like to turn also and just talk about the future of nursing in a broader context. Still keeping in mind where we started with the quote from Florence Nightingale, that nursing is a fine art, and it is always going to be a person-to-person interaction at the bedside. But as you consider preparing yourself to be best positioned for opportunities in the nursing profession going forward, I think it is important to recognize that technology will make an impact. Technology is impacting and will continue to make an impact, and perhaps even a growing impact on nursing. Depending upon where in the world you are practicing, electronic health records or electronic medical records might already be a part of your daily routine. If they are not, you should get prepared, because they will be sooner rather than later. Electronic health records and electronic medical records really is just the beginning of, I think, a significant technology impact in the nursing workforce. As we go forward, I think it's going to be important for nurses to have technology skills that are going to be on par with clinical skills. There will be technology tools not to replace nurses, but to help support nurses, both from a productivity and efficiency perspective, as well as from a resource perspective, where you'll be able to have vast amounts of patient and clinical information at your fingertips. So anything that you can do to expand your knowledge and understanding and skills within the realm of technology, while at the same time you continue to practice and develop and further your clinical skills, these are practices that will put you into the best possible position to advance your nursing career, regardless of where in the world that may take place. I think another unique aspect of nursing in the future that we're already beginning to see in places today is the reality that some nurses, and a growing number of nurses, while they'll be involved in a form of patient care, are going to be delivering that care remotely. We're seeing in various places remote monitoring of different hospital monitors in ICU units, even, where those monitors are being monitored at a central location away from the nursing unit in an effort to optimize the available nursing workforce. We're seeing remote nursing in the form of patient admissions, patient discharges, parts of the charting process, chart audits is another example, remote patient monitoring. These are things that are starting to take place now. And when we talk about working remotely, it's not just working in a different building or even working in a different city. We're seeing that some of these tasks are being done globally, where MRI scans completed in the US are being read by radiologists in Australia, where patient admissions and patient scheduling for appointments here in the US are being completed by nurses working in the Philippines, and other similar types of scenarios. So remote work is going to be a very interesting part, I believe, of the nursing profession going forward into the future. Again, I say all of these things with the reminder to all of us that while these will be future developments and while they will be important and while they will have an impact, they will not come close to filling the role that you as a registered nurse fulfill every day in the hospital or the clinic or the facility where you're working, delivering frontline care to your patients and to your residents. But it is a realization that how you do your work is in part going to change. The resources and supports you'll have available to you in real time in your workplace are going to, I think, continue to evolve and change, I think, in a positive way. But nursing always is going to be a calling for those that are most successful in their careers, that are most fulfilled in their careers. And it is an exciting time to be a registered nurse. It is an exciting time to enter training as a registered nurse. It is an exciting time to consider opportunities around the world that may be available to you as a registered nurse. And I hope that these very brief thoughts and some very general comments have been helpful to you today. And with that, I'm going to invite my colleagues Tracy and CJ, who are supporting our webinar presentation today and who have been monitoring the chat, to lead us through responding to any questions that may have been received. Tracy, hello. Thank you as always for joining. If you haven't yet submitted a question or even a comment, please do so now in the chat and we'll be happy to respond to you. So Tracy, any questions that have come in today?
Yeah, thank you, Ron. And hello, everybody. Tracy Drake, Manager of Communications Marketing Worldwide. I just mentioned in the chat, if you have a question, please go ahead and drop it in, and we'll be glad to answer it there. I did see one question that I would love to pose. And it was when we were listing some of the countries where nurses are coming from.
Yes.
One of them is asking, what about Guyana?
Guyana or Ghana?
Guyana, G-U-Y.
Yeah. So historically, there's been a relatively small number of nurses migrating from Guyana, particularly to the U.S. But, and in all honesty, I'm not that familiar with the educational standard, for nursing in Guyana. But there's absolutely no reason why a nurse that's educated in Guyana and has the requisite clinical skills wouldn't be welcome to apply for positions around the world.
Excellent. Yeah, and there's we see many countries, nurses from many different countries apply. And I personally, I don't think I would need some time to list them all because I've seen quite a few.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question to ask: how long do I have to wait? This particular nurse asking has been in the queue for about 2 years now. Can you address that?
So I'm going to assume that this individual is asking about an application to the United States. Typically, visa application for a registered nurse to the United States can be completed somewhere in 15 to 18 months. So if somebody's already been in process for 24 months, I would need to know the details and the circumstances of that case as to why it's taking so long. It seems to me that that's kind of outside of normal processing times. But generally speaking, up until recently, we were seeing processing times in the range of 15 to 18 months, sometimes even a little bit sooner. Yeah. Tracy, an interesting question I'll just throw out and just ask our guests to share their response in the chat section, and that would be: if you had to choose a country to migrate to today, what country would that be and why? Just very briefly, what country would that be and why? So just put your response in the chat. We'll be interested in seeing your responses. So just like to throw that question out there.
Great question, Ron. Next question. And this is really addressing kind of the length of the process, just because we see so many of those questions, and it is the immigration process does definitely take time and patience. And this particular person's asking about a CNA position. They have been selected and given a job offer as a CNA. And when I get there, then can I do the NCLEX exam is the question.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. That is a big advantage of the CNA opportunity. It does provide you with the opportunity. It does provide you with the opportunity of arriving in the U.S. as a permanent resident, and it does then give you unrestricted opportunity to pursue licensure as a registered nurse.
I want to go ahead and share some of the answers I see in the chat. This is answering the question, what country are you interested in pursuing or immigrating to? Of course, I see USA, Canada. Someone mentions the process is quicker.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, Tracy, and I see that comment here in the chat. And it goes back, to my earlier points about really getting a good understanding of each country that you're looking at going to, and how does that line up with your personal priorities and your personal abilities and resources. So Canada is a really great example. So I agree 100% that the immigration process to Canada is probably one of the more user-friendly, shortest time to complete immigration processes. And it's even possible for registered nurses around the world, in some cases, to gain permanent residency status in Canada, even without a job offer from a Canadian healthcare employer. Okay, so that's great. Great news. Get there fast. Canada is a wonderful country. I was born in Canada myself. But what you also need to understand is that the licensure requirements for international registered nurses in Canada are very, very difficult and probably the most daunting of any of the other developed countries. So yeah, you can get there fast, but you may not be able to practice your profession. So understanding these issues and these different combinations of facts and requirements from country to country are essential, because if your priority is to get someplace quickly, then probably Canada's at the top of the list. But you have to then also consider, you can get from where you are to Canada, but you're probably going to have a difficult time getting licensed without taking significant additional courses, which take time and cost money, etc. So great question. Kind of help me make the point of some of the issues that I'm trying to call out for our attendees today.
Yeah. Excellent point. Yeah. A lot of USA mentions, some of the Canada mentions, Australia was even mentioned once. And it was interesting because the comment is they're considering Australia, USA, and Canada, all three, because they have implemented patient blood management.
Right. Well, so that's someone for whom a certain clinical aspect of their practice is a high priority, which is perfectly fine and perfectly valid. So that's a great starting point. Now, given that this is a consistent fact across these three countries, then what are the next priorities that this individual wants to consider in terms of their own personal journey and personal goals?
Yeah. Rima asked the question that's on many nurses' minds these days. What about visa retrogression in the U.S.?
Oh, the R word.
The R word. As
it's come to be known, the R word. So visa retrogression. So it's not specifically the focus of our conversation today, but it is, I do understand, very, very top of mind. I'm happy to speak to it just very briefly. So visa retrogression refers to a scenario or the circumstance where the number of visa applications in process are greater than the number of available visas in the current fiscal year. And when that happens, processing times are regulated to ensure that only the maximum number of visas that are authorized are issued in a particular fiscal year. And that circumstance or that situation is referred to as retrogression. Currently, the United States Visa Bulletin states that visas are currently being issued to nurse applications that were received up until February the 1st, 2022, which means that currently, if your application was initiated after that date, there's a waiting time for additional visas to be made available so that your application can be concluded and a visa issued to you. Just a couple of things that I'll point out, Tracy. One is an additional allotment of visas, annual allotment of visas, which is 140,000, will be made available effective October the 1st of this year. So we are cautiously optimistic that when these 140,000 additional visas are made available in October, that the visa processing dates will move forward significantly, perhaps even return to current. So we're watching very, very closely for when the October Visa Bulletin will be issued in mid-September of this year. That's one issue. The second issue, and this is a really important one, and I want to make this hopefully as clearly as I can, and I hope that everyone will take this information to heart and into their consideration, and that is visa retrogression only impacts the very end, the very last part of the immigration process to the United States. It does not in any way impact, restrict, or limit U.S. employers' ability to continue to file new petitions, and for those petitions to be adjudicated and reviewed in the normal course of time without any delays. So while there are currently some delays at the last stage of the process, that is for visas being issued, there is absolutely no restriction on new petitions being filed, and there's no delay in those petitions being adjudicated and approval notices being issued. I make this point strongly and with emphasis because regardless of what the current processing times are, it is very important to note that processing times are based on what is called a priority date. And the priority date assigned to your case is really nothing more than the date on which USCIS originally received your application. So by deduction, right, this means the sooner you have an application filed for you, the earlier your priority date will be, and the sooner you will eventually be issued a visa. It may take a little longer than it's taken in the past, but the reality is the sooner you begin, the sooner you will complete the process. Retrogression has nothing to do with will a visa be issued to me or not. It simply has to do with the timing of the process. So hopefully that's helpful. It's a concern. It's something to take into account as you consider your opportunities around the world. Again, are your most important priorities short term, long term? What are the other considerations? But visa retrogression is an issue. We hope it's something that's going to be transitory. Again, as it relates to the overall processing time, I'll just say the sooner you start, the sooner you will be completed with the process.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. And in that answer, I heard an answer to another question posted, which was your prediction. That's always a dangerous question. Your prediction for the next visa bulletin or the next couple of visa bulletins. And I liked your response of hopefully, optimistically hopeful.
Yeah. So I'll just quickly add. So the July visa bulletin is out. I expect to see really no change in the August and September visa bulletins, maybe even just a slight move back, but I don't expect to see anything significant in the August and September visa bulletins. And then, as I said, everyone will be, anxiously awaiting the release of the October visa bulletin when these additional visas become available. So, stay tuned for the October visa bulletin.
Yeah, and before we even get to the October visa bulletin, we're going to have a great webinar coming up with two immigration attorneys, and Ron will be picking their minds. Chris Masillo, Mike Hammond, talking about all things retrogression. So a deep dive into that topic.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Tracy. I'm really super excited. This is the first time that we're able to host two of the preeminent healthcare immigration attorneys in America on the same webinar presentation, right? This is like having Coca-Cola and Pepsi together. So really super excited to have my good friends and colleagues, Chris Musillo and Mike Hammond. They really are experts. And if the topic of retrogression is of interest to you, please watch. We'll soon be opening registration for that session. Please register. Please have your friends register. Seating, online seating is limited to 5,000. And I think we're going to probably surpass that number. So please be sure, if this is of interest to you, when registration is open, to register you and have your friends register just as quickly as you can so that you can be assured of having the opportunity to participate in this exciting webinar presentation, where we're going to have two of the leading experts on the topic of healthcare immigration and retrogression share with our guests their analysis and their insight. I think between the two of them, Tracy, they would have probably upwards of 60 years of healthcare immigration experience.
Yeah. So keep an eye on our social media pages for that registration for that webinar, guys.
Yeah. Tracy, if there's any other questions, let's take one more, and then I'll turn it over to you to wrap us up for today.
Sounds good. I would really like to end on this one because I think it really ties in what we've been talking about today in today's webinar, the future of nursing around the world. And this question, it comes from Emmanuel. Thanks for sending this one. The question is it likely the U.S. will do something about their immigration process with regards to the shortage of nurses?
Yeah, we would need a whole nother presentation hour for that, but it is a fantastic question. I'll just answer briefly this way. I believe that the environment and the possibility of something being done on the regulatory and legislative side to make more visas available and to make the processing times shorter. I think that is more likely today than it's ever been in the past, just because of the heightened public awareness around issues related to healthcare workforce and the shortages. So while the political process is always an arduous one, again, just like with retrogression, I am personally cautiously optimistic that we will see in the near foreseeable future, some regulatory or legislative action that will make the immigration journey for healthcare professionals to the U.S. Easier and faster.
All right. Thank you, Ron. And just I wanted to share just a couple updates and upcoming events. We talked about our retrogression webinar that's coming up, but also check out these world tour dates that we have. This is where we're going to be live and in person, hopefully in a location near you or soon to be near you. And in July, this year is moving right along. Here in the middle of July, starting on Monday, July 17th, Ron and some team members will be in the United Kingdom. Those dates roll through July 17, from London into Birmingham, UK, Manchester, even into Dublin, Ireland there, as they're wrapping up that week. But more dates, more locations to be announced. Expect to see us with some Asia locations and some Gulf region locations, and we might have even some more coming up after that. So stay tuned. I can't stress it enough. If you need those updates, please like us, follow us on Facebook. That's where you're going to see these future webinars. You're going to see upcoming live events. Really, all of our news is really getting out there on social media. It's going to be the fastest way to see it. And finally, check out our Refer a Nurse Friend program. If you or someone you know, friend, family member, is also a nurse, and they qualify, which would mean having passed the NCLEX RN exam, which is required to work as a U.S. RN. If they've met that requirement, then they can be referred as a nurse friend here. Earn up to $250 for each qualified nurse. So that can happen for each qualified nurse applicant that you provide. So just some updates there. Ron, your final thoughts.
Yeah, Tracy, thank you. Thank you for that. Look forward to having our guests join us on future events, whether it's here online or live in person. I'm looking forward to being in the UK in just a few weeks, to being in Korea, Philippines, and Singapore in September, and to follow that up with personal appearances along with some very special guests in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the UAE coming up in November with more locations to follow. I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us today and remind you to be on the lookout for an email version or an email that will include a recording of today's presentation. Feel free to refer to that recording to review any of the information shared today. Feel free to share the link to that recording with your friends and colleagues. As Tracy said, following us on Facebook is the best way to keep up to date with all the information that we try to share with the international nursing community on an ongoing basis. It is a privilege and an honor for us to be working with thousands of nurses and walking alongside with them on their journey to a better future and a brighter future for themselves. Thank you for all you do as a registered nurse. I know that for the vast majority of you, you do the work that you do because it's something you do from your heart. It is your passion. It is your vocation. The world needs you. Thank you for what you do. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon. I pray that you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and we'll look forward to speaking with you again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.